He's back, as we promised yesterday. And I understand from a reliable source that we got a lot of good response from our conversation yesterday morning with Kevin Kushman. Kevin heads up Electrada. He's the CEO. He's been around in the energy, technology, and utility world for 20 plus years. Integral Analytics, Blue Pillar, and Current Group, founding leadership of Synergy Ventures. And I could go on and on and on. CleanBridge Energy Partners, energy technology firms led by Kevin, have secured over $150 million in venture and private equity investments, playing instrumental roles in the transition of the energy markets and incumbents to embracing distributed, renewable, resilient, and optimized resources. And there's a word we might pull out when we talk to Kevin here in just a moment. But, well, let's talk to him right now. Kevin, good morning again.
Morning, Dave. Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
You know, I say good morning again because we talked yesterday, but also because we talked about 2 minutes ago during the news break. And we were talking about GATS, a Great American Trucking Show, and I don't even remember how that got into the conversation. But a lot of folks blame COVID for the demise of GATS in Dallas, the Great American Trucking Show, but it had already kind of veered out of the major spotlight, I think, because when you walked in, the first thing you saw was a guy selling pots and pans like he was on a TV commercial, and the massagers. You remember all of the massagers that they used to sell.
Well, I think it's an interesting place for a lot of these big conferences or big events, and like you were mentioning off air, Dave, the CES show has now incorporated mobility and transportation and trucking, and a lot of the technologies involved in that now. It's been a huge wave for CES. So you see the digitization and the crossover effect hitting the daily lives of people moving goods and people.
Boy, I'll tell you what, CES has been going on for so many years. Couldn't be any more removed from trucking than we are from Mars or something. And the only trucks in and out were the ones bringing the exhibits, right? And now there's practically a trucking wing at CES, from what I understand, because you were there.
We were there, and you see it, same thing at ACT Expo and a lot of the traditional trucking network opportunities where you're starting to see a lot more focus on those transitional technologies, whether it's autonomous vehicles or electric or alternative fuel vehicles. And it's not bad because there's so many technology providers that are now getting exposed to trucking as a new market for their products, whether it's chips or digital technologies and so forth. So it's really cool to see.
Yeah, Jimmy McIntyre were there, of course. So you know that because you were there too, and you guys met there. It's funny you say chips because don't you remember when the news was about? Well, we've got 47,000 cars and trucks out here. They're just waiting for the chip. They're ready to go. We don't have that last chip.
We saw a lot of those new trucks parked in parking lots or overflow lots waiting on those last pieces of supply chain slack to loosen up. So glad we're not in that circumstance post-COVID anymore, but we have new challenges, as you're aware.
One of the many things that our listeners out there on the road and in the terminals and everything, in the wonderful world of trucking, the WWT, Kevin, is the fact that we understand a lot of things together and collectively, and then there's a whole world that we don't really have a full grasp on. We think we might know a little bit, and we're going to put our foot in the water. But let's kind of get really down to brass tacks here, because I think this is what people not only want but really need at this point to kind of get a bearing as to where we are, maybe a benchmark. So for anybody listening right now, especially in the trucking world, who might not be familiar, what is, and I know sounds like, whoa, that's the dumbest question I've ever heard, but how many people can really answer this? You're one of the guys that can really answer this, so I'm going to repeat it. For listeners who might not be familiar with fleet electrification, what is fleet electrification, and why is it important, and why is it important right now?
So it's the setup of all setup questions, but what fleet electrification is, it's really looking at a long-term conversion strategy where you're building in this case, electric fuel as an alternative fuel for transportation of all types. from school transportation to last mile delivery to over the road, and just building in electric fuel through battery electric vehicles as a way to bring cost parity and additional opportunities to do that, manage those logistics routes and manage those trucking responsibilities in a more cost-effective way. But it has the side benefit, of course, of being a more sustainable way, less polluting way, and providing the ability to source the energy from a different place, and a place that already has an embedded distribution network in the U.S., and that's our electric grid. So the idea of electrification isn't a snap the fingers, oh, every truck is electric in my fleet, all my vans are going out, they're all electric, they're coming back to charge. It's a multi-year, potentially multi-decade transition plan, but it's leaning on incumbent advantages we already have, which is the grid, which is our own energy supply and technology and things like battery manufacturing that's coming to the U.S. and is already in place here. So taking advantage of our existing benefits.
I always try to build parallels. Sometimes, I've talked about the similarity between this little radio studio in the cab of the truck, and we're by ourselves, and we have a control panel, dashboard and steering wheel, and I have screens. Guys on the road have windshields and things like that. But is there a comparison? And I've tried to make this, and you won't go back this far, I don't think. But when I came back from the Army in the early 70s, in the 1970s, generally speaking, we were living in an apartment at that time, and I was in our 20s, and somebody came to the door and said, "We're going to run a cable from the telephone pole to your TV." And it's like, "Well, what are you talking about? You mean you're going to run a cable to every television in America?" Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do, and that's exactly what they did. Is there a parallel to what you guys are doing and that, or is that just kind of dumb?
Well, I think the greatest parallel is to think about that initial cable drop to your home or to an apartment building that was running throughout the building to say, oh, wow, now I have to go from 6 channels to 106 channels. That same cable then transitioned into a telecommunications pipe to the house. So then all of a sudden you have things like voice over IP, and you could do telephone calls. And then you can, upgrade that cable, upgrade that line, and then you started overlaying it with fiber optics, and all of a sudden you have a lot more bandwidth coming into the home in a distributed way. The same thing applies to what we're talking about for fueling trucks, because that electric network that was started to be built over a century ago and is distributed everywhere. Everybody has multiple plugs, multiple drops and services to their home or commercial enterprise, can now be used as a fueling source. So you're now getting double or triple the asset utilization out of that same wire. Sure, the utilities have to upgrade in different places to take advantage of that new demand coming from transportation, but the basics of the distribution network are already there. So in essence, every kilowatt hour, for example, in electric fuel that goes across that same infrastructure is cheaper on the margin than the additional gallon of fuel you have to pay for at the pump, because it's being moved all over the place. So we have a much different approach here for electric fuel, especially for trucking and especially at depots.
One of the things, we're going to take a break here, so we'll kind of pick this up on the other side, but one of the things people really zero in on both sides of the issue, because there are two sides to everything now. There's a political argument over whether the weather is partly sunny or partly cloudy. I mean, it's come down to that. So having said that, yeah, you can make the environmental argument, but the economic argument is the argument that always wins in our culture, in the Western world, if you will, maybe across the world and across the ages. And there is a definite economic argument to be made here that goes so far out we can't even see the end of it. We kind of talked about that a little bit yesterday when you said that you can nail down energy costs years out instead of weeks or days out. And we compared that to the EIA's weekly and somewhat volatile at times pricing on at-pump diesel. So there's a lot more to talk about with Kevin Kushman. And the phones I forgot to tell you, the phones are open, 615-292-6366, if you have time to call.
Freight is moving at Cree Carrier and Schaefer Trucking. We are growing, and our customers keep growing with us. If you want to be part of a company that appreciates what you do and rewards you for it, You should check out Cree Carrier Corporation. We're looking for safe drivers that have at least 1 year's experience and take their job seriously. Then we reward you with great pay and some real serious benefits. Freight's moving, so check out Creed and Schaefer today. Go to creecarrier.com and find the right job for you.
Exceptional value and exceptional values. That's Bennett Trucking. A core commitment of faith, family, and freedom has driven Bennett to being the leading provider of innovative, integrated transportation solutions, both at home and abroad. Bennett's values are not just compatible with providing high-paying jobs and unmatched customer service. They're inseparable. If you're looking for an employer or a partner who believes the best business model is being a model citizen, then Bennett Trucking is the place for you. Go to BennettIG.com and find the folks who share your value. Look at the east-west runs, and interestingly enough, nothing happening on I-10 or 12 or 14 at this point, or I-20. But all of that weather is down in the Gulf right now, but it's heading towards land again, and it's going to be another big day on I-10. But we jump way up to I-64 from Louisville to Chesapeake. Rain, 70, Goodland to, at Goodland, Kansas, and then from Terre Haute to Frederick. On 80, rain at Morris, Illinois, on over through to Chicago and Gary. Then rain at Du Bois State College and also Mount Pocono. I-90, rain at Albert Lee, on over through to about Rockford, Chicago, Gary, and rain on to rain from Buffalo, Erie on through to Buffalo. And on I-94, rain at Eau Claire, and that'll run you to Gary. And that's a quick look at Interscan weather brought to you by Shady Rays. Keep those Shady Rays on. They will protect your eyes from the elements. We have a caller, Kevin. So Kevin Kushman is with us, CEO of Electrada. And Bandit is with us up in Indiana. Hey, Bandit, good morning. You're on with Kevin now. Thanks for calling.
Good morning, guys. This is going to be an interesting call. First, I wanted to thank Kevin for providing all the content that he's provided and information that he's provided when he's been a guest on the show. And then I have my daughter, Giggles, with me, and she had a special message for you, Dave, so I'm going to pass the headset to her.
Okay.
Hi.
Hey, good morning, Giggles.
Good morning.
So you and your dad are out on the road in Indiana, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you for keeping me entertained all the times I've been with my dad on the road.
Ah, fantastic. How long have you been out?
We just left today.
Mm-hmm. I have a feeling this is not your first trip, though.
No, this is not my first trip.
Ah, okay. Yeah. You sound like an old timer already.
I guess.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being with us, and thank you so much for being part of the program officially now. And I know you and your dad are going to make the jump to the continent with us, so thank you for that. We'll see you on the other side. We're going to get back to the electrification of the world in a sense too, Kevin, because it is something that, you know, electricity is one of those strange things that really appears naturally as well as artificially, isn't it?
Well, it certainly does naturally if you think about the weather or natural sources like
Thinking
solar
of Ben
energy.
Franklin there, you know?
Yes, exactly. The kite with the key. Any way you can harness naturally occurring energy, obviously, is a lower cost approach typically. So that's part of why, again, electrification of transportation makes a lot of sense, because then you can take what local available resources there are, whether it's solar or just the utility grid power that's coming to a specific site and use that for transitioning your fleet over to electric vehicles. But again, it has to make sense. And your earlier point, Dave, was about cost effectiveness of this and the political football that EVs have become for some reason, in commercial EVs, really all resides back to this concept of total cost of ownership. And that's our North Star at Electrada, is to make sure that we're always solving for total cost of ownership parity. The trucks, we all know, are slightly above to significantly above their diesel replacements if you're talking about an EV. But if you think about the discount on fuel coming from electricity and the lower maintenance profile of electric vehicles, you start getting into an equation that puts a lot of the use cases for medium-duty vehicles especially, and moving toward the box trucks and heavier duty, in a really nice spot if you think about a multi-year, 5, 7, 8-year investment. So that's what we're most excited about.
It's interesting, and maybe we ought to go to a real-world example here too, because if we keep talking in esoteric terms, you still can't get a handle on what you're saying. But I think we can really get a handle if we can talk about FedEx and UPS. I mean, UPS, a company that started with a kid on a bicycle now, electrifying 5,000 vans. So they are making it real. Let's talk about the transition of what it would look like for FedEx or UPS. From maybe square one. Maybe if you could squeeze that into a few minutes.
Try to do my best to summarize. So
no pressure at all.
No, we'll just kind of knock it out. If you think about setting aside grants and incentives and all the kind of political aspects of things that people are have both sides opinions on, if you just think about where you can be most effective with electric vehicles, you want to be highest utilization of those assets on a pretty predictable route structure. So maybe not necessarily over the road right away, but those delivery vehicles, those return to base, under 200, 250 miles, and even in last mile delivery, those medium duties under 150 miles, that really fits well the capacity of the vehicle today and for the next few years. Match that against where costs of power and cost of deploying infrastructure to serve those vehicles for powering them, for charging, are really the lowest in the country. That heat mapping, if you will, really generates the program for a lot of our fleet customers. So while California has gotten a lot of the attention in the first few years of fleet electrification because of the compliance environment, while that's fading a little bit, a lot of the attention, we believe, is going to start shifting to Texas, the Southeast, Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, where all of those cost factors really play well, as does the use case for the vehicle. So that's where we kind of take the hand of the fleet owner or the carrier or even individual owner and say, here's what makes the best sense for you. And you might not be in the money until 2028 with the vehicles that are available today. But between now and 2028, you can do these things with 10, 15, 20% of your fleet and still do very well, because that complete cost of ownership is at or below your current cost with a fossil-fueled vehicle, which is actually pretty amazing. And not a lot of folks do all that math. They think about, there's free vehicles and there's free charging being put up and the government's paying for all of it. When you strip all that hyperbole away, you actually have a pretty compelling economic case.
It's interesting. The truck driver has always been our listener through the 5+ decades now. But now, since we've been on satellite radio, and in the future when we go to streaming, we're going to be on in the daytime, these same hours, and we'll be 24/7. What I'm getting at is the folks in the terminals, the executives in trucking are listening now as well, folks who handle and operate big companies. You'd be the first to admit that at this point in the game, and maybe even 20, 30 years out, we are not going to replace every diesel-powered truck with an electric truck, because it's just not practical for a lot of applications, and we can go down that path ad nauseum. But can you explain why electric fleets are actually a better financial decision, but especially for the larger operators? And we've already talked about FedEx, UPS, but can you dig in a little bit more on that? Because again, the argument about the excise tax is, there's an economic argument to be made there, but the argument that they are making is cleaner trucks, cleaner air, because you can afford them if you don't have that 20,000 plus tax on it, and safety, because all of the new trucks have the bells and whistles and the ADAS. So you get that. Let's put electric fleets into the equation here.
So the great question, and I think it starts with if you think about the larger carriers or the larger fleets, the decisions they're making are where and when to electrify, or even they use the same math thinking about things like compressed natural gas or renewable natural gas, any alternative fuel. It's what is the incremental cost of transitioning, and this is why Electrada is around. We actually step in and capitalize and build out all the infrastructure and enter into a fuel contract with a customer. So a large organization that has 400 trucks at a site, the next 3 years, they may only electrify 100 of those trucks, but they'll be the ones that best fit the routes for the trucks, the battery capacity, the availability for cargo, refrigeration, those things. And you start there. And what we do is match the cost of fuel that they have currently with their diesel-powered trucks. And we can do that because the cost inbound to the site for power is far lower on a per-mile basis than the cost of diesel fuel, because that's set in a global commodity environment. You mentioned the EIA. This is a different environment when you have utilities. There's 3,000 utilities in the U.S. providing electric power. They all have different rates, so we can cherry pick the rates and the locations where it makes the most sense to deploy electric vehicles to start. And then secondly, just building that in a clustered fashion. So you don't ever really want to do 2 or 3 trucks at 30 depots to start. You'd rather do 10 to 15 trucks at 3 or 4 depots to start, because then you get the benefit of economies of scale. If I have to put a new electric transformer there to handle the new electric demand from the trucks, or I have to put a new breaker panel to handle the demand of the electric trucks, I can do that, spreading that investment across a dozen or 2 dozen trucks at a site, and you really then start to pick up that value relative to the replacement cost of a diesel truck.
You know,
so it's not clustering, it's about location and timing.
When you have that laundry list of alternative fuels, my big question is, okay, where are you going to put all this stuff? You mentioned natural gas. We have electric. We have diesel. We have all of this stuff. Where's the real estate? And that's where the expense comes in. One of the things you guys are doing, there's greenfield development and brownfield development. You got a vacant lot full of grass and weeds nobody's ever built on it. That's greenfield. That's starting from way in the hole. But you got brownfield development, which is stuff that's already been used, but it's abandoned, stuff like that. That real estate has, that's cheaper real estate. In other words, that's where the investors are, right?
That's where we are, and that's ultimately where the use case is, where 80 or 90% of the use case is at that exact depot, the distribution center, warehouse, dispatch location, package hub, where you already have the trucks. They're already sitting there for hours at a time in some cases, and there's already electric service there. So it really takes one last step to electrify those vehicles, and it's much cheaper. You don't have a lot of sunk costs, like you mentioned, Dave, in real estate acquisition. So for us, it's about always maintaining focus on lowest cost per mile. And that's how you win over the UPSs and the FedEx and the Walmarts, because they're so cost conscious. You always have to be ahead of that decision making on their behalf.
If you remember Sam Kinison, he made a funny joke about a horrible situation when people were dying in Ethiopia, and he would say, "Go where the food is. Go to where the food is." Well, you guys are bringing the electrification to where the trucks are already. That is something else. There's a lot more to talk about, and I hope we'll continue to do that. Kevin Kushman with Electrada, Electrada, ELECTRADA.com.